The rain had started before sunrise, turning the streets of the city into shining ribbons of gray. Ethan Carter tightened the collar of his worn jacket as he hurried toward the towering glass building that housed Carter and Hawthorne Industries. His shoes were old, his briefcase had a broken handle, and the wrinkles in his shirt refused to disappear no matter how carefully he ironed it. None of those things mattered to him. Today was supposed to change everything. 3 years earlier, Ethan had lost his wife, Lily, to an aggressive illness that emptied their savings faster than he could earn them. Since then, every morning had begun before dawn. He worked odd construction jobs, delivered groceries in the evenings, and spent every free minute raising his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie. Sophie believed her father could fix anything. He wasn't sure that was still true. "Dad," she had whispered before school that morning, slipping a folded piece of paper into his hand, "this is for good luck." He smiled as he remembered the drawing inside, a stick figure wearing a tie, holding another little stick figure's hand beneath a bright yellow sun. Above them she had written in crooked letters, "My dad never gives up." Those words were worth more than any paycheck. The receptionist greeted him politely before directing him to the waiting area where nearly 20 candidates sat wearing expensive suits and confident smiles. Ethan quietly took a seat. Across from him, 2 applicants glanced at his worn shoes before exchanging amused looks. "He looks like he's here to repair the air conditioner," one whispered. The other laughed. Ethan pretended not to hear. He had learned long ago that pride never paid bills. Minutes later, a young assistant called his name. "Mr. Carter." He stood. "Please follow me." She led him into a conference room where 3 interviewers waited behind a polished wooden table. One introduced herself. "I'm Angela Brooks, Director of Human Resources." The second smiled politely. "I'm Victor Reynolds, Operations Manager." The third barely looked up from his tablet. "I'm Michael Grant, Senior Financial Officer." After brief introductions, Angela began. "Tell us about yourself." Ethan took a deep breath. "I don't have the most impressive resume in this room." Michael immediately raised an eyebrow. "But I know how to solve problems, lead people under pressure, and keep promises." Victor leaned forward. "What makes you say that?" "I managed construction crews for 12 years. After my wife became sick, I accepted every job I could find. Roofing, electrical work, warehouse shifts, deliveries, anything honest." Michael interrupted. "So you've been unemployed from management for several years." "I've been employed every single day," Ethan answered calmly. The room became quiet. Angela continued. "Suppose one of your employees makes a costly mistake. What would you do?" "I'd ask why it happened before deciding how to respond." Victor nodded. "And if the mistake cost millions?" "I'd still ask why." Michael frowned. "So you wouldn't fire them?" "If they were careless repeatedly, maybe." "And if it happened once?" Ethan shook his head. "People improve when they're taught, not when they're humiliated." Angela wrote something on her notepad. For nearly an hour, the interview continued. Questions became more technical. Some Ethan answered well. Others exposed gaps created by years away from corporate management. Finally Michael closed his folder. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." The sentence carried a finality everyone understood. Angela forced a sympathetic smile. "We appreciate your time." Ethan stood. "So, I didn't get the job. I'm afraid we've decided to continue with candidates whose experience is more current." He nodded politely. "I understand." There was no anger, only disappointment. He thanked each interviewer before quietly walking toward the elevator. Inside, he looked at Sophie's drawing one more time. "My dad never gives up." He folded it carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. Outside, the rain had become heavier. He crossed the street without noticing the black luxury sedan pulling into the company entrance. Inside the car sat Richard Hawthorne. Few employees had ever met him. The Billionaire founder rarely visited headquarters, preferring to oversee global operations from abroad. As he stepped out, he noticed something unusual. Near the entrance, a janitor struggled to move a heavy cleaning cart after one wheel became stuck in a drain. Dozens of applicants walked past without slowing. One man stopped. Richard watched silently. It was Ethan, still dressed in his interview clothes. Still carrying his battered briefcase. Without hesitation, Ethan set down his bag and knelt in the rain. "Let's lift together." The janitor smiled gratefully. "I've been fighting this thing for 10 minutes. Together they freed the wheel." Ethan wiped muddy water from his hands before helping gather supplies that had fallen across the sidewalk. "Thank you," the older man said. "My back isn't what it used to be." "No problem." Ethan smiled. "We all need help sometimes." He picked up his briefcase and continued walking toward the bus stop. Richard stared after him. Something about the man's quiet kindness felt strangely familiar. He turned to his executive assistant. "Who was that?" She checked her tablet. "Interview candidate. Ethan Carter." "Did we hire him?" "No." "Why not?" "He wasn't considered competitive compared to other applicants." Richard looked toward the disappearing figure. "Bring me his file." 20 minutes later, Richard sat alone in the executive conference room reading every page. Employment history. Performance reviews. Recommendations. Volunteer work. Military service. Medical leave records connected to his late wife's illness. Richard remained silent. Then he opened another document. Attached to Ethan's application was a personal statement. One sentence caught his attention. "Leadership begins with serving people when no one is watching." Richard slowly leaned back. He remembered writing almost the exact same words in his own notebook 40 years earlier after starting the company with only 3 employees. He pressed the intercom. "Angela." "Yes, sir. Tell me about Ethan Carter." There was hesitation. "He interviewed well, but his experience isn't recent enough." "What kind of man is he?" Silence. Finally Angela admitted. "He seemed honest." Richard nodded. "Honest is becoming expensive these days." A few minutes later he asked another question. "Did anyone notice what happened outside?" "No, sir." "I did." He stood. "Prepare my car." Angela looked confused. "Sir, I'm going after the man you just rejected." Outside, Ethan sat alone beneath the leaking shelter of a crowded bus stop. Rain dripped from the roof onto his shoulders. He pulled out his phone. Only $23 remained in his bank account. Rent was due in 4 days. He closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he wondered whether hope itself had become too expensive. Then he heard tires stop beside the curb. A sleek black sedan pulled over. The rear door opened. A sharply dressed older gentleman stepped into the rain without an umbrella. "Ethan Carter." Ethan looked up, confused. "Yes." The stranger smiled warmly. "My name is Richard Hawthorne." Ethan recognized the name instantly. The billionaire CEO himself stood only a few feet away. "I believe," Richard said gently, "my company may have made a very serious mistake." Ethan blinked in disbelief, unsure why one of the richest men in the country had run after a rejected applicant in the middle of a rainstorm.